Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Men in the Arena. Welcome back to the arena with me, your host, Matt, and my co host, MD. First and foremost, thank you all for being here. If you feel called to, we'd appreciate hit that subscribe, hit that follow button, tell your friends and family. It helps us reach more people and touch more lives. So, we were trying to figure out what to talk about, and there's been this idea that's been floating around my brain, and it's this idea around playing it safe in life and what that looks like and what that means. Because I'm sure to myself, that might mean something different than to what you are thinking about in your head right now as a listener, and potentially something different to MD as well. So, in my experience, and what I came up with was this paradox of this idea that there's actually nothing safe about playing it safe. And so, MD, I would like to get actually, why don't we just start with your perspective? When you initially heard that, or when you hear that, what does that mean to you? And how can you kind of relate that to your own life?
Yeah, when I initially heard that, by the way, welcome into the show, guys. Yeah, my uh, first thought was like the definition of safety. I think safety and being safe is a buzzword in like the health and wellness space, and like it's a very, I don't know, meditative term, and I just thought straight to like nervous system, and like that version of safety. And so I think getting clear on like when you have that sort of phrase of like there's nothing actually safe about playing it safe, like what are we talking about, right? Like you can play it safe in a sport, you know what I mean? Like you can make a conservative judgment call managing a baseball team. That's not the safety I think that you're implying there. And so um I think what it's meant to me and what it had me do once I like got clear on that sort of definition of safety was realizing that like playing it safe in a sense is like a version of an attachment to status quo of like staying complacent, staying put with what is because of fear of what could be. And so like not taking the risk, not pursuing certain growth, not maybe pursuing that like next level of connecting to your authenticity. And I think obviously like a lot of how I thought about that phrase was because it came from you. I thought about you and like what that probably has meant in your journey in your life recently and over like the last handful of years. And so, I reflected on like what that probably has meant for you from like an identity perspective. And then I've also taken time to think about what that has meant for me. And probably most recently and maybe most prominently is my career. I made a pretty big change in my own life, but also like I would be first to admit, and I can speak more about this, like I had really played it safe for maybe 2 or 3 whole years, probably even at the beginning of making a certain decision 5.5 years ago, that I've only now have started to like take the more courageous step that I'm grateful I did. So
And
um
I've even, that you say that, I've heard you've labeled yourself as risk averse, at least when it
yeah.
comes to your career. I've heard that phrase plenty of times.
Yeah, and I think like anybody, when you start to put labels on things, like that's where that attachment comes in. I hearing you say that, I would be critical of myself constructively to say like I shouldn't identify as somebody who's risk averse because that puts me in a box and that reinforces something consciously, maybe even subconsciously, right? Like that in of its own is a belief system that I don't have to agree with for the rest of my life, right? Like we've talked about agreements. And so
Yeah, it kind of helps you
yes,
like
I have.
validate your choices in a
Yeah,
way.
it makes me it's the egotistical way of saying like, Mike, you're in the right spot because you're playing it safe and this is just who you are. You're a risk averse person. And so yeah, you can get caught in this little bit of a trap where you're like truly convinced that like this is where you need to be because this is who you are. I've been getting really into identity attachment, so this topic is really timely in a sense because I think identity is very much like where this phrase uh, applies well.
Yeah, I mean, I think about playing it safe, both in the macro and in the micro for my own life. Like playing it safe in the macro are these kind of big, grand, not even just decisions, but almost again, kind of like identity, if you will. Like, living as inauthentic for the first 25, 26 years of my life, living in the closet, staying in a corporate job that I knew I shouldn't have been in, staying in a relationship that I should have really never been in, but definitely knew I didn't want to be in, and stayed in it because it was the quote unquote safer thing to do, but also in the micro. And I think that's where, I think I've made a lot of growth, and I think just living more freely, taking some calculated risk, if you will, recognizing that, yes, by playing it safe, quote unquote, you are surviving. You are also avoiding discomfort. So maybe it's more comfortable in the moment. You're avoiding vulnerability. But I also recognize that you're avoiding the same things that make life worth living. It just led to a very boring life. And but also I think now where I still have challenges, and I think we all do, is in those micro moments of playing it safe, where for me now that might look like, I've been seeing another guy, feeling like just the natural urge, instinct of a human to hold another human's hand, but quote unquote playing it safe because I'm in public and I don't know what people are going to think, and I'm worried about being judged, and the fear of what others are going to think about me. It's really what I think about myself. But my point being, there are still now micro moments where we quote unquote play it safe. And I think the more that you can recognize and catch it kind of in the moment, I think the more opportunity and build awareness, the more opportunity you have to make a different choice. Because I think the more often that you choose otherwise, the more you'll see that, yes, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but you're going to be okay. And the more your brain, like you said, we're very malleable. So the more the brain will start to just naturally act otherwise. So that's kind of my initial thought process when it comes to playing. It's so broad, but yeah.
Well, and I think there's a lot to break down, probably more with your life, like that story, because earliest parts of that were you realizing that you no longer want to live out of fear. And so, like, I think we use the phrase of like being in the closet, right? Um, and it metaphorically applies really well. Like the closet, when there's a boogeyman or monster, right? Like that's your safe space. Like that's a place that you go to literally hide.
Howie and the Benchwarmers.
Missing on that reference, but
How you
uh,
never seen the Benchwarmers?
I don't think so. I
Oh,
don't
you're
think I've
gonna
like
love.
watched it, not
That's
like all the
crazy.
way
You
through
would love
enough where
it.
I like would
All
know the
right. Well,
reference.
you got homework.
This isn't about me though. This is about the listeners. So I'm sure they all grabbed that one. Um, but point being there, like that, I think that's what you mean by playing it safe. There really was nothing safe about hiding in a closet, hiding yourself, hiding who you are. And like, I think you probably have more to speak on in terms of like, what did it feel like to be playing it safe? And then, how has that like since evolved? Like then you get into like these micro situations in life where you're like, maybe you're more comfortable taking risks because you've taken what maybe in your life to this point has been the biggest risk you've ever taken, and it boded really well for you, right? Like, so I can see very easily why this quote is something that you're inspired by, or like you would inspire onto others. But like, yeah, speak more about like what playing it safe really was like for you. Um,
Yeah, I think it's to your point. Like every decision is out of a place of not connection to self, but is outwardly focused. It's not about yourself. It's about how is this going to be perceived by someone else, by society. So every decision I made was made from a place of disconnection. It was made from a place of how am I going to best fit in? And oftentimes that consciously or subconsciously led me to straying away from my values and not even really knowing my values, to the point where I didn't even know my values because I was living kind of a completely inauthentic life. So it gets to the point where it feels numb, which is, I know, like it feels, but then numb is not feeling, but you just feel so disconnected that you don't get high, you don't get low. Life is just bleh. I mean, it's like I said, it's boring. You wake up, you kind of feel like you're going through the motions. You do this thing because you have to. You go into the office because you have to. You come home, you maybe numb with some sort of drug, alcohol, video games, whatever it might be, and you do it all over again. And you really don't understand how and why you're moving the way you are. I think what I've recognized, and I only can do this now because I've connected with myself, is like I have a very, very maybe oversimplified framework for how I make decisions. And it's like, am I making this decision out of fear or am I making this decision out of love? And it's probably oversimplified for some, but to me, it makes things very easy to understand. Like, is me not holding hands in this case with a guy I've been seeing a choice out of love or fear? And that's very easy to answer: fear. Because I know I can feel intuitively what I want to do, and I know what the right answer is logically. And so that's kind of the framework that I ask myself, is like, my goal is to continue to live more of my life heart led, with, self-respect, all of those things that would fall under the bucket of love and connection to self and others. And I think fear is quite the opposite.
Yeah, there's a quote I'd read out loud here on this book I'm reading. But then I also want to get into, I think you're at a part now in this journey, if you will, where is more relatable to what I had to overcome, in a sense that, like, I'm sure nowadays, like, you are getting a lot of affirmation from your support circle, like explicitly telling you, like, it's okay to be you, and like that's probably new than what it was 10 years ago for you, where like maybe you were seeking some of that, but like didn't know how to do that without exposing yourself. Um, and so like I want to get back to that, but so much of what you're talking about, and there's this quote in this book, it's called The Mechanism of Letting Go, or it's called Letting Go by David Hawkins. True love is free of fear and characterized by non-attachment. Fear of loss energizes undue attachment and possessiveness. I just thought that was like brilliantly phrased, because it's like fear of loss, like loss of what, right? Like loss of your sense of belonging, loss of your sense of acceptance in the world. Well, if you fear that judgment, if you fear, showing that you're holding hands with a guy in public, and you fear that like judgment around you and how you'll be perceived, that's going to energize undue attachment and possessiveness of not only that fear, but also of like this version of you that won't do that. Right. So like right now, it just sounds like you're still very attached on this micro thing, right? Of like, I won't do this. What's been so cool though is like over the years, it's just been one like micro domino after another that you've just been able to knock out. Right. So
That's
like,
all it is. I appreciate that
yeah.
you recognize that, because that's all it is in life. We look at, like, look at where we're at, and we think we have to, and we look at like the top of the mountain, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so far away, I can't even start. I mean, it's like even writing a book right now. Like, you know how just the thought of writing and putting pen to paper, but like, oh my God, I got 200 pages to write. And where do it's like, just put pen to paper and start writing. Like I literally just had Claude. I was like, ask me some questions, inspire some thought. And it did. And I just started writing with no thoughts of like what chapter this is going to fit into, but it just got me going. And so that's really all my life has been, is taking small steps that just make sense in the moment. And I think that's applicable not just, to my experience, but to all experiences in all areas of life, whether it's relationships, whether it's career and finding something more meaningful or purposeful to you.
Yeah. And like, what I've learned, just by observing you, is that it's like this idea of coming out and like stepping into a new identity. It's not a one step process. It's not like, okay, he did it. Like, we're here now. We've arrived. Like, no, there are steps to this thing. Like, there are, and it's like a daily, you might take steps backward, right? Like, there might
You
be
will.
chips that you've knocked over. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, there are things that you've overcome, but then there are some days that maybe you won't overcome it that day. Right. Like, and I think that's been so eye opening for me, is like, there was a text message you sent 3 something years ago, essentially stating this like new identity of yourself. Right. Which I think even identity is a strong word, but like, in a lot of our minds, we get so focused on this macro thing of like, okay, like, I accept it and this is what it is. But there's just so much more that has to still happen, like micro decision after micro decision. Um, so it, I like the way you put it. It's like I have a very simplified framework, like, and it's almost like apple and cookie, going back to like our first conversation, right? It's like, am I making this, for me, apple and cookie was like, am I making this decision out of like what's best for me? Or am I making this decision out of like what feels better in the moment, but maybe isn't actually serving me long term, right?
That's a goat episode, by the way. Is that the first episode we did? Or second? I think it was
I
second.
I could be first.
First
It
or
could be
second.
apple cookie was like the
It was
was
one
like
or
the moment
two.
we felt
But
like
you
we were
guys
onto
should, if you
something.
haven't listened to it, you definitely need to go listen to that. That was back in February of 2023. So over
Yeah.
3 years ago. But that was such a great episode. Anyways, go ahead.
No, I mean, every time I see a staircase next to an escalator, it's like the only thing I think about is like, choose the staircase, like, if you're able-bodied, like, do the thing that's better for your health and wellness versus like the easy thing that taps into laziness, right? Simplified, right? Like, I don't know, if your ankles
But
hurt, take the
but I
escalator,
think
but
but I think it's true though. Like every decision you make is a vote for the person that you are and are becoming. It's it, and it may sound like, oh, that's ridiculous, but it's quite literally true because that's how habits are built. I mean, I even think of like it's something as so small as when I go to the gym and like my stretching routine beforehand. And there was just one thing that I added, which is I like to kind of hang from a bar because it kind of like stretches out your back and it's good for my shoulders too. And I would do it once and like I'd do it once a month and when I'd remember. And then I did it like 5 days in a row. And now it's habitual. I don't even think twice about it. It's just part of the routine. So every choice makes a, in the long run a big difference. And I think when you're going against the grain or you're going against who at least who you've been or the decisions you've made previously or about who you thought you were, it requires a lot of awareness and a lot of presence to catch where you probably would have made a different decision and consciously choose to make a different one. When it comes to my life and dating, for example, and recently, like there have been so many times where I've had to make conscious choices to keep my heart open when everything in me wanted to close it and to make a different choice and do what I would normally do. So the work is incredibly difficult, but it requires a lot of awareness. But if you can just catch yourself and make those micro choices in a different way, it will lead to long results. But you can't look super far out. You just have to look at the next day and the day after that.
yeah, I'm also curious about like that far out piece. Like, has all of this made you a more ambitious, like, do you have more ambitious tendencies or behaviors, or are you less risk averse now, right? Like, and you start thinking a big picture, like, what else can I, like, what are the big grand mountains I can go climb? But then all the while realizing like the only way you climb that mountain is still, being pretty focused on, where your feet are now and like what's that next micro decision, and like your ability to climb that mountain very much hinges upon your ability to like stay pretty locked in on, like you said, putting the right vote into the right ballot box for yourself, and so that's more a rhetorical question. I'm sure the answer is like, at large, you probably are more ambitious today than you were 5 years ago. or at least are operating more ambitiously. And like, just to give another example, I think about like my career trajectory and this is where I'm just curious your thoughts on this. It's interesting because when I first got into sales, um, at like the entry level, like the BDR role, um, I was really successful. I won an award. I was like one of the best producing BDRs, and like all the while you're getting celebrated. And there's just a lot of people out there that are telling you in that building, like, you have what it takes, you have star potential, you're going to be an awesome seller someday. And for whatever reason, when the fork in the road presented itself to go into team leadership and go into management, one of the first things I felt like was this gave me an out. It gave me an escape from the fear and the pressure of being an individual contributor, right? And like there was pull factor. I'm passionate about coaching and leadership, but I was also pushed in that direction by my own fears, by my own self doubt, even while I had a building of people behind me and still do. And so for like 5+ years, I ran this very safe, comfortable track of being a middle manager of a BDR organization. Only since last year did I make that transition to then go into the quote unquote scarier thing, or like the less safe, like the riskier role. And even when I was going in that, there was still this like insane amount of support and belief around me. The point here is like, while you tackled so much of yours, it's seemingly more alone without like external, hey, you got this, right? Only until I think maybe when you went to a therapist and like talked to somebody and got some of that. For me, my point here is like, you can still have that support system all around you that believes in you, and you might still not believe in yourself. And like, that's my version of like where I played it safe for so many years. And like, there were parts of me where I would see other BDRs that I had coached or like managed indirectly, and I would see them on the same trajectory as me. They were really like high performers. And then they went on to sales and they performed really well and they validated that they can do it. I was so happy for them, genuinely happy for them. But there was also still a part of me, like consciously, that would come up as a thought of like, that's the version of you that you haven't stepped into, that you didn't step into, somewhat driven out of fear. And
And that's where
so,
you have to take the action, because like what I'm here, it's like
yeah.
I don't want people to get this idea that like, go take risks nonstop, do this. Like you were in a role that you genuinely enjoyed as a manager. You had found a lot of fulfillment. You were obviously good at it. But then what I'm hearing is there came to a point where there was maybe a little bit of a lack of personal development, a lack of growth, there was stagnation. And so I think it's when we start to feel those types of feelings and we still choose to stay in it, that's where I think we're saying like there's nothing safe about playing it safe. It's when you start to feel like you're limiting yourself and yet you still choose, when your intuition, what we all know, that kind of inner knowing that is like, hey, it's time to do something else. Like that's when we have to actually jump.
Yeah. Yeah. And it, the other part of that, yes, there was a complacency component. And I go back to this analogy of like, it would be wasteful to run another lap around the same track. Like, I need to just switch tracks. I need to switch mountains, right? I need to start a different climb. I need to start from the beginning. I need to be new at something again. That was, yeah, very much like, that was the part where it's like, okay, now I finally feel the inertia, like the push factor to like go and face the next mountain, the next thing that's, fearful. And the other part of that, and something you probably relate to, is like, the earliest part of that is the hardest part. I got shell shocked. My nervous system was like firing out on all cylinders when I went into this role, because like I was a fish out of water. I had to learn a whole different motion. I had to reinvent my day to day. Totally changed. Everything was very radically shifted. And in some ways I like also stepped into a very new identity. Right. And so like, there's different levels of extremes, but like for me there, it was like those first 3 or 4 months, I was a shell of myself. I fell into very like stressful binge eating habits and like was just not a great version of myself. So much of that because I was like so stressed out and I was so like in this element of fear, just uncomfortable, totally like out of my zone of safety, if you will. Right. And like only now coming into this year have I actually got my feet under me, and I'm realizing like this was the best decision I've made in like the last 7 years for my career, right? And like I think
Yeah,
that's
and
the part to
that's what I think. I
understand.
think that's what important is like that's what I meant by what I mean by a life full of quote unquote playing it safe is a life of boredom, is a life of a lack of growth. Like, yes, it sounds like that period obviously was there's a lot of change. You weren't used to operating in this way, just a totally different work style, lifestyle, and it was uncomfortable and it was difficult. But on the other side of that is growth, is learning more about yourself, is learning new skill sets, is now having, been through that experience. So if you experience something similar, you've now got the wisdom, the experience to handle it in a better way. So to me, it's like when we take those risks, like sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes it is going to lead to maybe again, like you said, we go backwards or we stumble. But in almost all cases, we get up and you may have some cool stories to tell. It's more adventurous. It's more exciting. So like that's kind of what I mean. And then by the way, like I think you also had a chance at one point since this, like, the goal was obviously to get into more of a sales role, to sharpen your skill set, to broaden your resume, that type of thing at the time. So then you could eventually become a manager again and so and so. And then you kind of it sounded like maybe had an opportunity to do that at one point and you're like, actually, wait, I actually like this sales thing. Like, I'm going to stay in this. And it's so that we don't even realize what we actually want to do. We think we do, and we try to plan ahead, years and ahead, and I'm going to do this. But it's like you might take step one or step two and then realize that, whoa, actually, now that I have more information and I've learned about this experience, I want to stay in this or I don't want, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and like it almost contradicts itself in a sense that like now that I'm performing well, I feel safer in the role, right? Like it's easier to have more fun. It's easier to see this longer term, right? Um, but I also think like there's still so much I'm learning every single day. I'm
Yeah,
still
you're
I mean
allowed to enjoy it.
I'm far from complacent, and like there's a lot of upward potential in what I'm doing, but also it's really helped move me closer to a career situation that has helped me unlock like a more holistic lifestyle that's more aligned to how I want to spend my time. Like account executive is the closest thing you can get to like a time freedom business owner without being a time freedom business owner, like time free business owner, right? Like I work as many hours as the next person, but like there's just far more autonomy. There's things that get unlocked in this. Um, that now like allow me to travel more. I can live remotely, within certain time zones. And I'm starting to like now take other risks. Like I didn't re-sign my lease. I'm going to go like digital nomad it a little bit. Right. And I feel a lot more secure in doing some of those things. Largely because I think over this past year, it's like, yeah, you're plenty capable. There's nothing, like you can do things and knock you off your horse for a couple months, but like to your point, you always get back up. And worst case scenario, like you just go back to what you need to go back to get, back to stability. So, um, yeah, no, that I mean, leadership's always a thing that I can go back into, but um, like right now, it's very much more about what is the best lifestyle for me, versus like what's like the next thing of status that I want to go achieve.
Is there anyone in your life, or can you think about whether it was you in like in the past or someone in your, that friend, family, or colleague, like, have you ever seen someone not take a risk and then really regret it? And they've been outward or outspoken, like they've expressed the regret. You don't have to give like the particular person if you don't, but like just,
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like relatives who stayed a certain career path, but I think what it really comes back to is a lot of what we're talking when it comes to career, and even for you, like what it comes down to is your relationship with money, and like, are you of a certain scarcity mindset? It actually brings me to another quote in this book that I want to talk about, but like, I think so many of my relatives, like I'm pretty much first gen here, and like so many of my relatives they went through a lot to just even get into this country and like get any sort of stable income and get out of poverty. And so like their life experiences, I think, lend itself to something that's a little bit more of a scarcity mindset and a little bit more of a fearful mindset because they're in this like survival state mode. And so I can't judge that because I've never lived that, right? And like I really want to be careful not to place judgment because they did take a lot of risks in certain regards, but like where they didn't take as much risk, where they might have played it more safe and where I think they just accepted survival in certain areas was career. And so like they developed a trade, they developed a skill set, but they stayed in like their working environment versus they had every opportunity to take that skill set and start their own business, right? Like they had opportunities to, in some ways, like up level and take it to that next thing, which is like, you've built these skills. Can you take it to a market and like run a business, do like the American thing and like start a business, right? Like, and I saw glimpses of like, this relative's like plenty comfortable and they have what they need. They've built a family. They're raising kids. Um, for them, this was their mountaintop. And so like, I think that's the other thing to take away in some regard. It's like, yeah, they played it safe, but also I think in their life and their based on their lived experiences, like this was plenty of a peak. And I think that's like the other thing to really think about. It's like it's convoluted in a sense because people might hear this and be like, well, it must be nice to just be able to take all these like financial risks, right? And it's like, yes, like everyone's risk is different. What we're talking about is from like an abundance fulfillment perspective. Like sometimes maybe you have to take a safer road depending on like survival instinct. So that's, I don't know, maybe
Yeah,
a
I mean, I
tangent,
think
but
no, I think I mean, in some ways, yes. Like my decision to leave the corporate world, in part, was a financial risk. Um, I think there's also the risk of if you care, like, what if I, what if I fail? And people are like, "Oh, you thought you thought you could do this, really?" You know that. So there's also the social risk in that way. But I think, and of course, my situation financially is different. Yes, it was a risk. My worst case scenario might look different than others, but it's still a risk either way. Now, the level of risk
yeah.
relative to the downside. But yeah, so I think what we're saying is we're talking more. There was no financial risk associated with coming out, for example. That was entirely socially and
And I
go
think
ahead.
like,
I could see you. I
yeah,
could see
no,
you
and I
pondering.
think, well, yeah, because I think also they've attached themselves to this version of themselves, right? Like, and that's been for for these relatives, like helping them realize, hey, you're safe now. Like you're not fleeing, a bad situation from overseas. Like you're in this country, you have an income, like you can take more risk, and that would be my counterpoint. And it's like that would be how I would actually challenge them a little bit, right? Like they got complacent. And there's no two ways about that. They got to a situation where they were on stable ground and they could take more risk, but because their relationship with money was so deeply conditioned at that point, right? Like the amount of inertia it would have taken for them to channel into that like sense of ambition was just it was pretty grand, right? Versus like if you're in your early 20s, early career, like and you have some safety net about you, like maybe it's a little bit less inertia required. I'm not excusing the like, hey, they played it safe, but they're excused, right? I'm just seeing that as like an example of like maybe they regret it. Maybe they look back and they were like, I could have done more with this American dream. I could have done more with my opportunity here. Once I got to this level, like I could have or should have taken that next step. And it comes back to this quote. It says, people who are carrying the consciousness of apathy bring poverty circumstances into their lives, and those with a prosperity consciousness bring abundance into their lives. And so it's kind of like chicken and the egg. It's like it wasn't their circumstance, it was their mentality that kept them trapped in a certain scarcity environment, right? It was their own mindset that made money feel so scarce. I want you to talk about like, because I feel like that's something that you've developed is more of like an abundance mindset and like how has that shown, like, where has your abundance mindset served you? Like, concrete examples where you've seen that show up?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the abundance mindset is a choice, and it's an active choice that you continue to make. It's not like once you have it, like it's just it's there, it's always there. Like I still it's like anything. Like I wake up and I thank God for the breath of life. I practice gratitude. Like these are choices I make because I know I feel better when I do. And I also know that if I don't, I think we're naturally more inclined to choose otherwise. It's just again, we have a negativity bias. We're worried about survival before we're worried about, thriving. And so I think it can get very easy to kind of fall back into that way of thinking and moving. And I've been down that road before, and I would prefer not to go do it again. I like this way of life a lot better. So I think abundance, when I think of abundance, I think of gratitude. I think if you can truly start to really embody and feel more grateful. And what I mean by that is, because I grew up with a lot. I've been very privileged financially, opportunities, but I remember like I could never really feel. I didn't feel grateful. It was almost like I couldn't unlock the feeling of gratitude, even though I knew I should. I couldn't like actually unlock it. I always found myself wanting more, or that I didn't have enough. And what I had to, and then I would feel shameful as a result. It's like, man, I feel guilty. Like I should be grateful and for all these things, and I'm not. And why is this the case? What's wrong with me? And what I think I started to learn through my journey of healing and discovery and things is like gratitude's a skill, meaning you can practice it and you can get better and worse. Again, when I first started gratitude journaling, for example, I was like, man, I'm just going to write down, I'm grateful for my friend's family dog. I'm done. That's it. What's the point of this? But what I recognize is when I started to do that over and over again, I really did. I really, really did. I felt a shift where I just started, what you look for in life, you'll find. And that is certainly the case when it comes to the feeling of gratitude and focusing more on no matter how little it might be, but the things you already do have, the good little wins that happen throughout your day. The more you focus on them, the more you'll see them. I mean, when I think about practicality, like, I mean, I get free coffee all the time just because I think I show up with an open heart and I'm grateful and considerate. I treat the baristas, I treat waiters and waitresses as human beings. I don't view myself as better. I think we're just because of where we're at in this particular situation. And I think people recognize and feel that. And when people feel appreciated, they want to give back. And sometimes when it comes to like a service worker and you're at a restaurant, the way they can give back is by offering someone a free banana bread or a free coffee, whatever it might be. So it's little small things like that I think when you show up from that mindset, not only will you start to look for it more, but you'll start to receive more. Like what you give, you will receive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What you put in, you get out. Like the cliches have been there. You also mentioned one that's like of like a biblical quote of like what, if you search, you'll find. Pretty sure that's like a quote around like if you seek me, you will find me. And that's, my interpretation of that is what Jesus spoke to, which is like a certain consciousness, a certain frequency within yourself. Like when you start that inner search, you will find answers, so to speak. You'll find and unlock new clarities. And so I guess if somebody, maybe to head towards a wrap up here, like if somebody were to be listening to this and they're like, these two guys are talking about abundance and just take a bunch of risk and like there's nothing safe about playing it safe, and like, oh man, I've been doing the same thing for the last couple of years. I'm a POS. Like I gotta get my what together. Like maybe not the message that we're trying to get across, right? So like if somebody's coming away from this feeling any bit apathetic or maybe even overwhelmed because maybe it sounds like something they want to do for themselves, but it just is, we've spoken so at like a macro level that might be overwhelming and might be confusing. Like you come across that person today and you want to deliver what could be like a first step. Like what's a first, maybe there's multiple ways you could go, right? But like what is a possible or multiple possible first steps that you would advise someone?
Yeah, I think a good first step is one to just be aware. So I think because you can't change what you're not aware of. So I'm assuming if this, I'm assuming that there's some sort of dissatisfaction in this person's life. And so it's like, where in your life are you dissatisfied? Let's just pick one. We start with one area rather than, life as a whole and all the different things and going on and on about how all these parts of our lives are just messed up. Like, start with one area, number one. And I think it's just asking yourself a question like, where are you playing it safe that may not be serving you? And once you've identified, and we all know, and I don't know what the answer is for this particular person, but I do know that they have an idea because we all have an intuition, we all have an inner knowing about when we're making decisions that are not in alignment with our values or where we want to go because it doesn't feel good in our gut, it doesn't feel good in our body. So it's like identifying that, just what that is for you, and then just taking one small action that would counteract what you've been doing. Again, doesn't have to be a grand gesture, just like one small action, like a micro yes. I can't say what that is for this particular person, but I think when you do that and you do it consistently, it's like if you want to build a gratitude practice, I'd rather you write down 5 things you're grateful for and why every single morning or every evening rather than write down 50 things you're grateful for tomorrow and then never do it again. I think consistency and habit building is much more important. So, like, just start small, whatever it is, and start building it into a little habit every day. And I think it'll compound and you'll start to get more answers when you start to take that action. The answers will start to come, but you won't know what they are until you take that first step. What would you say?
Yeah, similarly, but like also kind of cool how like maybe the first step is being aware of what you're even fearful of. And so like maybe the place to start is not many of us are very tapped into our emotions. We don't actually feel fear, right? But like our behaviors could still reflect from a place of fear. And so if it's hard for you to like feel that and you're not as like emotionally connected as maybe speaking to the choir here myself, like um you can start with like what parts of you are you most attached to? Or like maybe start with like an identity exercise. Like how do you perceive yourself and like break that down into parts. And then which of those parts do you feel most attached to? Um and then dig into like, well, why are you attached to that? And like is that serving you? How is this serving you? Or maybe how is this holding you back in certain areas, right? Um Example, I was attached to this identity of being a leader. Well, why am I attached to that? Well, it serves me because it's fun to lead. Well, also like because the alternative is this fearful, fiery, scary alternative, right? And so is there something else there that if I break off of this attachment could actually serve me um more fully? So
I think
simple
it's a
example,
good,
but like yeah,
yeah,
start
I
with
think,
like
I
what do you
think,
feel attached to?
I think it's a great exercise because you really got to be honest with yourself. Like, where is their fear and why is there fear? And like really sit with it and like go a little bit deeper than you normally would. Like sit with the question for a few minutes. Yeah, because you can't change what you're not aware of. You just can't. And so much of this is just building the awareness. So I think that's probably a good first step. Combine those two things, if you will. But thank you all again for another episode of any last words, MD?
No, thank you. This is it's just an ideal way to start any sort of morning. It really just, like you said, it's a skill, it's a practice. And for me, like these pod recordings tend to be almost like a practice, right? It like regrounds me in gratitude. It resets this mentality around this abundance mentality, right? Like I feel like I can go forth with my day a little bit more courageously, a little bit more conscious and aware of like my votes that I'm placing today. So no, grateful for you and having that conversation.
All right, everybody. Well, y'all take that little bout of inspiration and go attack the rest of your day wherever and from wherever you're reading this or reading. Maybe you're reading the transcript, but anyways, appreciate y'all. Again, hit that subscribe, follow button, share with a friend, family member, colleague, and we'll talk to you soon. Adios.